guys, welcome back to Your Mindset, Your Power. Today, we are going to talk about football. Yes, my friend. And for my American friends, I mean soccer. The one played with a round ball and mostly with our feet. Yeah, that one. Because for a little over a month, I have watched more football than I probably should admit. Let me tell you, my friend, I'm Colombian. And I have loved this game for as long as I can remember. I was incredibly proud watching my team. Of course I was. And of course I wanted Colombia to win. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was watching something much bigger than football. For 1 month, 48 nations came together. The biggest World Cup we have ever had. 48 countries bringing their flags, their songs, their traditions, their foods, their colors, and their own unique way of celebrating. And suddenly, the streets across 3 neighboring countries became one huge celebration, almost like one huge block party where not everyone was cheering for the same team. Yeah, everywhere you looked, there were jerseys from all over the world. You could hear different languages on the same train. You see rival fans taking pictures together. Watch complete strangers dancing to songs they probably didn't even understand. And some not necessarily singing songs, like the Norwegian fans and their famous Viking roll, for example. They made friends everywhere. Thousands of people sitting together performing their famous rowing chants in street parks and stadiums. Soon, people who were not even Norwegians were joining them. Rival fans even joined them. Players joined them as well. Even people passing by wanting to be part of it. Nobody needed to understand every word. They understood the feeling. That was beautiful. And I loved every second of it because nobody had to stop being proud of where they came from. Nobody had to hide their flags. Nobody had to become someone else to belong. And I think that's what touched me the most. We often hear that our differences divide us. But for one beautiful month, it felt like our differences were actually bringing us together. Now, I should probably make a confession, my friend. And I need to tell you something about my own house. My husband is Argentinian. Yep. And I don't think I have to explain to football fans what that means. Argentinians don't simply watch football. They feel it. They live it 365 days a year. Every match matters. And when there's not one, they're still talking about football constantly. I used to think I was crazy. I was a crazy football fan. Then I married an Argentinian. And I discovered that apparently I'm actually pretty normal. Well, I think my son will probably disagree because I can be very loud and passionate when it comes to football. And growing up in Colombia, Argentina was one of those teams I absolutely did not want to support at all, my friend. But life has a great sense of humor. Of all the people in the world, I ended up meeting and marrying an Argentinian. Isn't that funny? Now, imagine this World Cup. There was actually a possibility that Colombia and Argentina could meet in the quarterfinals. I was already picturing separate televisions, separate rooms, or even separate locations, and possibly separate legal representations. Okay, I'm joking. Unfortunately, Colombia did not advance. It was heartbreaking, but since Colombia didn't advance, I think somebody up there was simply protecting our marriage. But let me tell you something, now being serious, experiencing this World Cup practically in our own backyard, my friend, watching fans from all over the world, seeing the streets filled with different flags, different languages, different cultures. It really made me think, maybe we have a lot to learn from what happened outside the stadiums, not just as countries, not just as football fans, but in our own homes, our own neighborhoods, our workplaces, and in the way we treat each other every day. Because what moved me the most during this World Cup wasn't what happened on the field. No, it was what happened in the stands, on the trains, in the streets, and in those little moments that reminded me we have a lot more in common than we sometimes think, right? And yes, it was a lesson for me too, my friend. You know, one of the stories that stayed with me happened during actually Colombian match against Uzbekistan. Colombia scored, and a little Uzbek boy began crying. And something beautiful happened. The Colombian supporters sitting around him stopped celebrating for a moment. They comforted him. Then they started cheering for Uzbekistan until that little boy smiled. Think about that for a second. They didn't stop loving Colombia. They didn't stop wanting Colombia to win. They simply decided that in that moment, one little boy's heart mattered more than proving which side they were on. When I saw that, let me tell you, I could not stop smiling. It made me so happy because it reminded me that even in the middle of the biggest competition in the world, there's still room for kindness. And somehow that moment became much bigger than football. And there's so many stories. Let me share another story that touched me so much. A country with just over 500,000 people, Cape Verde, playing in their very first World Cup. Nobody expected them to go very far, but they surprised the world. They tied Spain. And remember, Spain ended up winning the whole thing, right? They made it past the first round and kept surprising the world. They even pushed Argentina into extra time. And in goal was a 40-year-old goalkeeper named Vozinha. A 40-year-old, my friend. He was making his first World Cup. Against Spain, he made 7 incredibly saves to help his country earn a scoreless draw. A few days later, he was making save after save against Argentina. Think about that for a second. 40-year-old not only helping his country make history, but also becoming a global sensation. Sometimes possibility doesn't care where you come from, my friend. It simply asks, are you willing to keep believing? And one more story stayed with me. Raúl Jiménez. A few years ago, after suffering a fractured skull during a Premier League match, many people simply hoped he survived. Forget football. They were just grateful he was alive. Fast forward to this World Cup, and there he was, wearing Mexico's jersey, scoring on the biggest stage in football. Sometimes we celebrate a goal without realizing everything it took to get there. The fear, the recovery, the setbacks, the decision to keep going, the efforts. Some goal count as one of the scoreboard, but behind them, there are years of courage, of never giving up. And looking back, it almost felt like all those stories were leading to one final message. The day of the final, before one team lifted the World Cup trophy, there was the halftime show. Children, music, wonderful artists, a celebration that brought everyone together one last time. And at the end, one simple word appeared: love. I smiled because to me, it wasn't just the ending of a halftime show. It was the ending of the entire World Cup. A reminder of everything I had watched over the past month. not just on the field, but in the stands, in the streets, in the stories. And I remember thinking, maybe that was the message all along. Love. So, as I watched this World Cup, one thought kept coming back to me. The World Cup didn't bring people together by making everyone the same. No, nobody stopped loving their country. Nobody stopped wanting their team to win. But somehow, people found a way to celebrate one another anyway. And I think sometimes we misunderstand what unity really means. We think unity means agreement. But maybe real unity isn't asking someone to remove their colors. Maybe it's making room beside ours for theirs. Now, imagine what could happen if we lived a little more like that in our families, in our neighborhoods, at work, on social media. What if before judging someone, we became curious? What if instead of immediately focusing on what makes us different, we looked for what we have in common? Because we do have a lot in common. We learned that in this World Cup. Because understanding someone, my friend, doesn't mean agreeing with everything they believe. And appreciating another person's story doesn't take anything away from our own. Maybe that's one of the biggest lessons this World Cup gave us. So, maybe the question I'll leave you with today is, who's wearing a different jersey in your life? Maybe it's someone at work, maybe a neighbor, a family member, a friend, someone who thinks differently than you, lives differently than you, sees the world differently than you. What if before deciding what those differences mean, we became just a little more curious? What if we listened a little longer? What if we looked beyond that jersey and simply saw the human, the person? On Sunday, July 19th, Spain lifted the World Cup trophy. Congratulations to Spain, by the way. But when I look back on this World Cup, I know that's not what I will remember the most, my friend. I'll remember the little Uzbek boy, surrounded by Colombian fans cheering for his country until he smiled. I will remember Cape Verde, showing the world that dreams don't care how big your country is. I'll remember Raúl Jiménez reminding us that sometimes the greatest victories happen long before the goal is scored. And I remember the streets filled with music, flags, laughter, and complete strangers celebrating together. And we may have watched some players wear their national team jersey on this stage for the last time. And somehow, that made every celebration, every goodbye, feel even more meaningful. For one beautiful month, the world didn't become less different. It simply remembered that our differences don't have to keep us apart. Different colors, different stories, different jerseys, same humanity. The World Cup is over, my friend, but maybe the lesson it gave us doesn't have to be. Until next time, take good care of yourself. And remember, your mindset is not just what you think, it's where your power begins. Have an amazing week. I love you guys.